lecture. We have today an amazing presentation called Myths and Realities Concerning the Two Revolutions of 1776 and 1821. Some tentative historical observations, Federation of Hellenic Societies, that's us, by Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Luke Atzos, for inviting me. So let me begin. First of all, I want to point out the word tentative in the title. In the title of my talk tonight. What I'm going to present are some of my ideas based on solid research using the sources which this research is still ongoing, preliminary, and far from complete. Whenever I deal with modern Greek history, I always remember the words of my distinguished professor, Dr. John A. Petropoulos, who always said to me, Constantine, modern Greek history is complex. One must always look beyond the surface and look deeper at underlying details that are not always apparent at first sight. I will begin by dealing with some of the common myths concerning Greeks and early American history, including 1776, which unfortunately continue to be repeated and believed within the Greek American community. It is important to speak out whenever you hear them, ladies and gentlemen, because I have found that the greatest challenge for any historian working in the early 21st century, it didn't move, huh? It's not moving. In the early 21st century is like never before, distortions and misinformation can be shared faster and more broadly through technology, which increases both knowledge and ignorance throughout the world faster and more broadly. Sometimes it is spread by well-meaning individuals who don't realize the harm they cause in the results. The first item often repeated is that Christopher Columbus, here we are. There you have Columbus. I know people like pictures, so I try to include a few pictures, although they're not really all that necessary. It's just so you have some visuals as well, based on what I'm talking about. The myth is that Columbus had a Greek background and was connected to a Byzantine family called Dissatisfied. The idea is based on a detailed book published by a talented Greek-American lawyer named Canudos. I have read the book, examined his sources, and our knowledge of Columbus's family, and I can assure you that this legend has no basis. Not only do we have detailed evidence concerning Columbus's Genoese family, but scholars have added to our knowledge about the Byzantine connections to Dissatisfied that he cites in his book. It is factual that Chios was a Genoese possession in his lifetime, and for this reason he knew about the mastic trees that are there. But there is no evidence that he ever visited Chios, let alone knew Greek. In reality, there are many Greeks who visited North and South America during the period of exploration and conquest, which you can read about in detail in a recent book, and the book is in Greek, those of you who read Greek, by Professor Kasiotis. Very detailed with lots and lots of information. It's just an extraordinary achievement. And it just came out, I think, last year or the year before. Another myth, often repeated, is that a certain Ypsilantis led a group of Greeks who fought during the American Revolution in the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. As my friend Steve Frangos has shown, This myth also has no historical basis, despite that it is repeated over and over again and in writing on the internet, etc. There were no Greeks fighting in the American Revolution that we know of. Another story that's often repeated is that the early American Congress almost selected Greek as the language of the United States. Another myth that has no basis. There were, however, some early pioneer Greeks, especially merchants, that lived in the American colonies during 1776. Some years ago, I wrote about this for a special 4th of July issue of the National Herald. I noted that the Kemble family, who settled in New York City in about 1730, had ties to the Mavrocordato family of Chios, Smyrna, and Thessaloniki, and then moved to Morristown, New Jersey. The article in the National Herald was called Paul Revere's Greek Connection. It turns out that Peter Kimball had a daughter named Margaret, who married General Thomas Gage, who led the British Army during the Revolutionary War. Not only was her father born in Smyrna and from a family familiar with these, but her paternal grandmother was from Chios. Some scholars have argued, and it looks like it's pretty solid, that Margaret was an American spy. And she's the one that tipped off the doctor who then sent Paul Revere on his famous ride that the British were coming. That's her. And this is why her husband, the General Gage, packed her off to England during the summer of 1775. Art historians have noted that an early portrait of Margaret, painted by John Singleton Copley, she is wearing what appears to be Oriental style clothing. And we have family documents in New Jersey that indicate that members of her family spoke Greek. So here we have a direct connection between Greeks and the American Revolution, and a female connection and a spy that helped Paul Revere and was devoted to the patriot cause. Another documented early American connection to the American Revolution concerns a person named John Paradise. John Paradise was born in Thessaloniki and was the son of a British consul and merchant, and married to an American wife, and moved to Virginia in 1787. His house, by the way, still stands. And if you ever go on a trip like I did to Williamsburg in Virginia, you can visit the John Paradise house. So here's another direct connection. He was a known sympathizer of the American cause and a friend and correspondent of Thomas Jefferson. In fact, we have a letter from Jefferson to Paradise where Jefferson asks Paradise to tutor him in modern Greek. So again, we have a direct documented connection between someone of Greek origin and the American Revolution. The house, as I said, is still preserved, and he is the first resident and the earliest house by a Greek American from the 1700s that we know of. I have found documents also that show that the first time that 1776 was celebrated in Greece by Greeks and Americans together was during the Revolution. This is one of the records of the celebration of American independence during the Greek Revolution, which I believe was the first time this was ever done. July 4th, 1827. All eyes and photos were turned towards me this morning. This is William Peckham Miller writing. As the birthday of my nation, took place that day. I therefore concluded to make a small dinner party, and by drinking a few toasts, Germans, Englishmen, Greeks, and Americans composed our party. We had many patriotic toasts, and the afternoon passed away agreeably. Another reference to July 4th is by Samuel Gridley Howe. This was a very different kind of record. Yesterday, the glorious anniversary of American independence occurred. I passed here, not in rejoicing for the progress of liberty and the happiness of man, for being the march of these, and they may exist in the West, for Greece has seen them drawn upon her only to fade away. Her affairs are going on every day from bad to worse, and they have now arrived at such a pitch that the inhabitants of the Morea are actually beginning to submit in despair. This is in 1827. Often when the Greek Revolution is discussed, it's treated as if it was a constant success. But I will talk about this probably in another lecture, that towards the end of the war, it looked as if the revolution was lost. And it was only the events of Navarino and events leading up to Navarino that changed the course of the revolution. Because things looked very, very grim, and this is why Howe wrote this. Howe's note is more somber than Miller's, because at that point it looked to him that the Greeks had lost the war. It is also clear that the importance of the American Revolution was known and appreciated by Greek leaders at the start of the war. Some knowledge was transmitted via Paradise, who corresponded and knew Jefferson. But the most compelling evidence is contained in the appeal for American aid sent to Edward Everett from the Messenian Senate in Kalamata in 1821. It's a long document, and I excerpted some pieces to it because I think it really shows the connection, and that those people who were the leaders of the revolution at that time really knew about America and about the American Revolution and American freedom. It starts, to the citizens of the United States of America, having formed the resolution to live or die for freedom, we are drawn towards you by a just sympathy. Since it is in your land that liberty has fixed her abode, and by you that she is prized, as by our fathers. Hence, in invoking her name, we invoke yours at the same time, trusting that in imitating you, we shall imitate our ancestors, and be thought worthy of them if we succeed in resembling you. Though separated from you by mighty oceans, your character brings us near us. We esteem you nearer than the nations of our frontiers, and we possess in you friends, fellow citizens, and brethren, because you are humane and generous. Just because free, generous, and liberal, because you're Christians. Your liberty is not propped up on the slavery of other nations, nor your prosperity on their calamities and sufferings. But on the contrary, free and prosperous yourselves, you are desirous that all men should share the same blessings that you enjoy and the same rights. It is for you, citizens of America, to crown this glory in aiding us to purge Greece from the barbarians who for 400 years have polluted the soil. It is surely worthy of you to repay the obligations of the civilized nations and to banish ignorance and barbarism from the country of freedom and arts. You will not imitate the Europeans in their indifference. No, the fellow citizens of Penn, of Washington, of Franklin will not refuse their aid to the descendants of Phocion and Chrysopolis. And the bonds of gratitude and fraternity will forever unite the Greeks and the Americans. Our interests are of a nature more to cement this alliance, founded on freedom and virtue. Isn't that an inspiring document? Isn't that a document that everybody should know about? Those people, they knew about America and looked towards America for aid. At this time, it was generally thought by most Americans that the Greeks would create a republic similar to their own, with no monarchy. And at that time, it was envisioned by some segments of the revolutionary leaders, although not by all. The factionalism and disunity during the war was complex and still not fully understood. The myth of national unity and agreement over how freedom should be implemented is another subject not usually talked about. Now let me turn to some common myths and realities connected to 1821. Please bear in mind that some of what I have to say may not reflect majority views, and I am still doing research. First, let's briefly consider the term revolution itself. There is no doubt that most of our contemporary Greek and foreign sources call the war a revolution, epanastasis. For example, I need only point out that one of the best American accounts of the war, written by Samuel Gridley Howe, who was there, bears the title, this is the title of his book, A Historical Sketch of the Greek Revolution. So he called it a revolution, like most of our sources did at the time. The European powers at the time were suspicious of any kind of revolutionary movement because they viewed it as dangerous to the status quo. Certainly the ideas circulated by Rigas Fereos, Corais, the Filikia Peria were heavily influenced by the Enlightenment and the French revolutions. However, what is rarely discussed is how really revolutionary was the result in Greece after the war. I will turn to this in a moment. However, let me point out that like with the American Revolution, some historians prefer to call the Greek War of Independence. You see that sometimes in Greek and in the literature in English. But once again, is this appropriate? Did the war result in an independent Greek state? Yes, in a legal sense, it was a sovereign nation state, but in reality, what resulted was the territory freed from Ottoman control then fell under the control of England, France, and Russia. A foreign monarch was imposed by them, and a new Greek state was put together under the administration of Bavarians and heterochthonists. In other words, Greeks from outside, not from within. Many of the local elites, autochthonists, felt left out. You only have to read the reminiscences of General Makayanis, who felt that those who fought and won freedom were not the ones who controlled the destiny of Greece after 1821. Again, this is not often emphasized or talked about. It took over a century for the Greek state to become free of foreign control. For much of its history, there existed a state within a state. The American public was shocked during that time when they learned that the Greek revolutionaries had accepted a king. They expected a republican form of government similar to their own. Recent scholarship has also shown that the Ottomans considered the Greek revolt nothing more than a revolt by disloyal subject peoples. And their view of the war was that it was a civil war, like other local lords conducted, like Ali Pasha, who played a role in what happened. In fact, the Greeks were very divided throughout the war and fought each other almost as much as the Turks. And the goals of the revolt varied over time and from region to region. The point I'm trying to make is that calling it a Greek War of Independence does not really work. So let's go back to the question of how revolutionary was the result. Just about everyone would agree upon during the war, they wanted to get rid of the Turks and live in a state where their culture and religion were no longer inferior and a handicap. Although some places had a degree of autonomy and were administered by local Greek elites as the Mogerondes, Koshabashides, and bishops, the reality was that their foreign ruler could take away their privileges at any time, and that they were always tolerating inferiors without security. This is why many of them left their homes to seek better lives elsewhere and created an extensive network, a diaspora network. Greek society was highly localized. A concept that I call localism is a key to understanding its realities. As Ottoman central authority declined, local Muslims, often in collaboration with Christian local leaders, exploited the rayades, and increased corruption and insecurity. It is almost never recognized that the situation without the religious dimension occurred in southern Greece during the late Byzantine period. As Byzantine central authority declined, you also had similar takeovers by local lords and disruptions and corruption taking place in the south. So the result of 1821 war created a new highly divided and dependent nation that was free from Ottoman rule, though without much change on the local level. This is the situation that Kapodistrias walked into. And I would argue that he underestimated his ability to impose centralization and modernization on this society dominated by localism. And he was viewed by many as a tool of foreign powers who threatened their local power. This is why he was assassinated. It may interest you to know that thousands of Greeks moved across the border into Ottoman Greek territory after 1830 because they did not want to live under the new realities being imposed. In Free Greece, it took a long time for the central and modern laws and ideas to actually be implemented and for the society to change. So how revolutionary was the result? It remains unclear. And these complexities are still a matter of debate. Some historians prefer to call the events of 1821 Greece's first war of liberation, because what is certain is that it liberated a portion of the Greeks living under foreign rule, but more remained outside the new state and needed to be liberated later. These historians view the process that was started in 1821 as incomplete at all levels, and only really ended in 1922 with the end of the Megali Revere. So there were wars of liberation after the first war of liberation. Liberation was certainly the result. Revolutionary change, I'm not so sure. Maybe or maybe not. This is not accepted by my younger colleagues who talk not only about revolution, but about international influence of revolutions. But research needs to be done about, on the local level, whether things changed or not. Now I see that I've got 5 minutes.
No,
Okay. 2 minutes, okay? So I'm going to stop there. I warned Lou that this talk will probably take 2 parts. Next time I'll talk about other myths related to the revolution. And I hope you found what I have to say of some interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, sir. Everybody, we've got 5 minutes. In terms of liberation, are we liberated now? Okay? In other words, are we liberated? Is the lust liberated, or are they affected by foreign nations?
Of course they are. Of course they are.
Anyway, I found it very interesting, obviously. I don't have many notes, but I will say one thing. I do know about Seraphim Canutus and his theories, etc. As a matter of fact, that book that he wrote actually is what decreased his standing within the community, certainly by historians who didn't care for it. I love Canutus, though, for his business directory. I thought that was an amazing piece of work that actually has never been duplicated, ever, in my opinion. It used to come out every year. It's totally
He
fantastic.
wrote a history of the Greek American community, that's what he did.
Yes, he did. Excellent scenario. All the other stuff is very interesting. Some of the stuff I got from you, obviously. So I knew some of this stuff. And John Paradise, I had heard about it, to be quite frank, but I need to study up on Paradise. The other stuff I thought was very interesting, extremely interesting. The command and all the rest of that, Paradise, all very fantastic. And we've got to do more research, I think, on Margaret. We've got to do more research on Margaret. In terms of a costume that she wore, like a Greek Oriental type costume, in that period, by the way, people were wearing those costumes. Okay, so it wasn't unique to being from Greece or whatever, because that's what was happening in America during that particular period. You'll see that in the
1700s.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, the late 1700s. So we're going to take a break of 5 minutes, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have our meeting. I'm so excited.